So happy Friday. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for ending your week by joining us for the Promise Neighborhood panel. I'm delighted to co-host the panel with Dr. Vera Lee, see here on your screen, and many of you already know. She's the co-PI for the School of Education on the Drexel Promise Neighborhood grant. Vera and I, as a little bit of a history, had been planning something a couple years ago, but then the pandemic sort of like presented this blockade. And we wanted to be able to have a showcase for the School of Education projects and any related research efforts. So we decided we're not going to wait another year because it'll just keep dragging on and on. We want to actually have a panel. So thanks for agreeing to have a Zoom panel. We're a bit delayed, but we didn't let it stop us. Also, thank you to the panelists for providing your time to serve on the panel at the end of the week. So today it's our hope by sharing School of Education, educational projects, and the research associated with it, we hope to foster a research community across faculties and students in the School of Education. And we have students that are also on the projects in addition to faculty. So kudos to them. And then also we want to record this and to be able to post it and to also share it to the Drexel community so we can better articulate what some of the projects are. So let me just tell you what the format is today. I'm going to pass it off to Vera, and she's going to introduce the presenters as well as give an overview of what the Promise Neighborhood grant is and a sense of the geography and location, the community and the neighborhood that it's situated in. And then we invited each of the three groups of presenters to have 12 to 15 minutes to present if they want to share a PowerPoint slide or talk, whatever type of format they want to use. They'll each have about 12 to 15 minutes. And then Vera and I composed a short list of questions just so we can dive a little deeper. And so then that'll be the panel portion. And so we'll ask you questions, simple questions just about your project, and all the panelists have been given the questions prior to us meeting today. And just so we can hear a little bit just from your own personal view, what it was like working on these projects and where you're at today and how you're going to continue on with them. So thanks once again for joining. And so now at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Vera with her part.
Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us on a Friday so that you could hear about some of the work that's been funded through Promise Neighborhood with School of Education faculty, taking the lead as well as collaborators across the university. So I was asked to just give a very, very quick 5-minute overview of what the West Philadelphia Promise Neighborhood Grant is. So the West Philadelphia Promise Neighborhood Grant is a U.S. Department of Education funded program. Drexel University had actually won the grant in 2016. The grant is housed out of the University Community Partnership Office. So Lucy Kerman, who's our Vice Provost of UCP, is the PI on the grant. And then there are two co-PIs, Amy Scott Carroll from the School of Public Health, along with Felice Schaar. And then I'm the co-PI on the School of Education side. So what the grant seeks to do is to improve education, health, and economic successes for children and families and communities in the West Philadelphia Promise neighborhood zone. So the focus of the grant is actually considered a systems building type of grant. So it's leveraging existing resources and programs in the universe in West Philadelphia, including Drexel University, partnering with community organizations, civic organizations, schools, to look at this as a systems building project. So the funding that we received, that Drexel received, is $30 million. That's $6 million annually. This is the 5th and final year of the grant. However, due to COVID, a lot of the programming couldn't be done. So we filed for a 6-year extension. So we're waiting to hear sort of confirmation about that. This is the website for the West Philadelphia Promise Neighborhood grant. It's a wonderful website. If you get a chance to check it out, you can see what programming has happened both on the health and wellness side as well as early childhood and K-12 programs. And 3 of those you'll hear about today. So who does the Promise neighborhood serve? So it's serving all children who live or go to school in the Promise zone. So these are the communities that are served by the grant. If you look on the right-hand side, there are 7 neighborhoods that are listed, and on the left-hand side are 7 schools that are served through the grant as well. Belmont Charter has a suite of 4 schools that are affiliated with it, and then the rest are public schools in the school district of Philadelphia, and 1 high school and 1 charter high school. We also have Ifill, our Action for Early Learning, who's very much involved on the early childhood side. The grant also sponsors funding for after-school programs and summer programs. And again, you'll hear about the School of Ed-led OST programs in a minute. It's also happening in local community centers. Dornsife is an active participant on this grant with the Beach Hill Family Learning Center for adult education programs, and other nonprofits are also key partners with this grant. This is the 2-mile geographic zone, or the map of where the grant, the coverage of the grant. So you could see, you know, to as far as 48th Street on the west side, and then you could see that it goes south as far as Sampson Street and all the way out to near Pelton Village on the right-hand side. So you could see the 7 schools in orange, and then as well as the childhood centers. We have about 20 affiliated childhood centers that are part of Action for Early Learning. And then before we get to the 3 School of Ed funded projects, we also have a requirement from the grant to offer some leverage funding. And what we mean by that are other funds that are matching funds from the School of Education. That could be human capital, meaning like faculty and student resources, as well as other fundraising efforts. So other grants that have been used to serve the children and the community members in the Promise neighborhood areas. So our field placement office has had a key role in that, placing our undergraduate teacher education students and graduate students as part of course requirements across our 7 schools. Pico Exelon, we had a 3-year grant that funded math supports for Powell and McMichael. This year, or last year, we've had undergraduate and graduate tutors at Powell and Belmont School. We've had professional development initiatives led by School of Ed faculty at these 2 schools, McMichael and SLAMS, as well as even some district-wide initiatives. We'll be placing an incoming new cohort of school psychology students at Belmont School starting this fall. We've also in the past done family STEM nights, co-sponsored with the Lindy Centers and the Critical Conversations in Urban Education at Martha Washington and Locke. And finally, an Aspire to Educate grant, which is really to help diversify the teaching pipeline. We had recruited 14 high school student interns from the Promise neighborhood to support 2 of our School of Education-led programs. So I am going to now stop share. So we have some wonderful presentations. So the first presentation, I believe, is Dr. Kareem Edouard, and he will be talking about Continuing STEM Education Academy. That will be followed by our second group, which is led by Dr. Ayana Handy, and then Dr. Valerie Ifill, and then Dr. Michelle, goodness, I'm sorry. Why am I losing track of names? I'm so sorry. They are leading the project on Black Girls Steaming Through Dance, and then finally the literacy camp, which is led by myself, and then Whitney and Pellizzeri, and then Katie Matthew, our PhD student. So Kareem, do you want to start?
Yes. Peace and good morning. I'm Dr. Kareem Edouard, Assistant Professor, School of Education. I want to share a little bit about the work that we've engaged at the ILLIS Lab. The ILLIS stands for Informal Learning, Linking Engineering, Science, and Technology. And part of the work that we do at the ILLIS is frame equity, culture, and identity right smack in the discussion of STEAM education. So the continuing STEM education is our direct action to the West Philadelphia community. So we want to share a little bit some of the work that myself, the Excite Center, Jillian Riley, Dr. Youngmoo Kim have been engaging in for the past few years. So first, I want to share just the folks that ground the ILLIS. We are very much intercultural, intergenerational lab that tries to create a safe space for particularly students of color, women of color on Drexel's campus. And we look to have the lab be kind of like this hub, this area where we could engage. So these are just some of the folks that have been working and leading some of the educational charges during the SEAS program. What I want to directly do is have a conversation about what took place as far as our pivot for COVID and how we had to make some very tough decisions, but we were able to be successful, as we see successful, in engaging students in the West Philadelphia community. To make that pivot, we had to go digital. So this is an actual direct recreation of our lab in the Gather space, which is a digital space, where we needed to figure out how we can engage students in a very direct, interactive way. And we had to speak their language and we had to engage directly in their language. And this provided us just kind of an opportunity to figure out what were the best practices for the pivot to a virtual environment. I wanted to kind of contextualize the SEAS program and what we expected to do and what ended up happening. So the SEAS program was a 10-week cohorted program for fall, winter, and spring. And each one of those cohorts, we would bring 20 high school seniors that were about to graduate or were in a situation where they weren't going to directly transition to college, community college, and were kind of nebulous as to their next steps. And these seniors were at West Philadelphia High School and then also Belmont. The 10-week program, we had the direct pilot program that took place the year before, but I'm only going to cover this year's program. And part of that program, moving towards a digital space, started October 2020 as the first group. So this is just us having a conversation with first group, and we'll share a little bit more about the next following groups. But we had to shift. So everything went from physically engaging to Zoom and Nearpod. And part of that kind of conversation is we wanted to really have a discussion around equity. So we had 13 female students and 7 male students to really push this discussion of trying to raise underrepresented folks within these spaces in our program. So this is just kind of the interface. So using Nearpod, we needed to have one kind of concise space where students were able to kind of engage with us in real time collectively, because as all of us will present, and I'm skipping a few steps because we all have kind of the same discussion around equity concerns for connectivity, computers. So I don't want to kind of rehash that. I want to give more of the direct tools that we've used, but it was plenty about. We all know that Philadelphia was at the epicenter for social political struggle that was happening for both our students and the educators. So I want to make very clear that the educators also struggled living in the West Philadelphia community. And then obviously the world lit itself on fire with the worst public health catastrophe possible. And this really made it difficult for us using an in-person community-driven set of practices, which is using your hand to develop and build. So Nearpod provided that kind of concise platform for us to engage in. And this is just some of the views of the activities that the students would have in their various devices to engage with us. So now I'm going to jump straight into the curriculum itself, and then we'll talk about some numbers and some research a bit later. So just kind of frame what we actually did. So for week 1, it was like a lab onboarding. So at the heart of the SEAS program is really arming our students with onboarding language in STEAM environments. So for many of the employers and internships, their discussion around onboarding and receiving particularly our students in the West Philadelphia community was that even though they may have had introductory makerspace or engineering courses, the language around both tools and practices was still missing, and it made it very difficult for them to kind of engage in these kind of internship opportunities. So what we wanted to do was to frame our actual SEAS program to help support this. So now we'll push a little bit further. So our first week was really to talk about lab safety tools, the different types of tools that would be available, facility layout, the types of materials that we'd be using, very hard skills. And then from there, we would have discussions around equity, internet equity. Am I not able to say this word now? Etiquette. There it is. Etiquette. Social interactions. I know that was all said in a recorded Zoom, right? Zoom interactivity, and then event planning. And this was very important for us to look at hard and soft skills. So for most of our curriculum, as I kind of breeze through it, is that we're looking at the hard and soft skills that the students would have had in person, but we transferred to a virtual space. So going into week 2, we had programs around city planning. So all of our activities, we tried to have a very social cultural framing of what we are teaching you from a STEAM lens has a direct impact on what is taking place in your community. So all these activities were figuring out ways to connect students, both what was happening outside their door and then on their screen. So continuing and moving on, we'd have discussions around technical drawings, framing of those conversations around the critical thinking principles. So really just very on the ground and very direct, applicable activities for our students, but then they still transferred in those opportunities for career pathways. So moving again, really trying to tap into the zeitgeist of the students as far as some of the movies, and content that they care about, and really just trying to shape more of how they become digital citizens and the footprints, which is very important, the digital footprints that they leave behind. So again, just kind of moving through it, this is some of the opportunities that our students were able to receive within the virtual platform, which definitely translated into them being able to engage in these activities when they left the space. So kind of moving forward, just wanted to share a little bit of our findings. What becomes super important and paramount from what I learned from my brother, Dr. Chris Wright, is that for any engagement that you partake in, there has to be some data collected and research that becomes important to share the content moving forward. So for us and how we framed the ILLIS Lab and then also the SEAS program was to provide that information, particularly in the context of the world that we were living in due to this public health crisis. So just kind of framing it, these were some of the ways that we collected data within the space. And we had 3 graduate students, one from School of Education, one from engineering material science, and we had another graduate student from UPenn that was part of this, this framework of collecting data and then also teaching opportunities for those students. And these are some of the findings that we particularly were able to tease out. Next week, we'll be doing 2 publications. One will be a white paper that will be accessible directly to educators. So that way it can help support some of the initiatives that they would be engaging in their classes, especially when it comes to the fall. And again, moving towards the discussion of publishing journal articles that really frame the discussion, particularly when it looks for equity content for our students, is some of the things that we found. What stood out to me, just as I'm coming up on time here, is that for our students, they would say very direct things to me, that it was hard for them to just open up their laptop, right? Their laptop is right next to their bed, and they were dealing with very deep anxiety, concerns, and struggles, and it was just hard for them to engage. But they found that the community that we built in the virtual space, and more importantly, the skills that we were teaching them, provided them an opportunity to think about something greater than what was taking place outside their window. So they were making the attempts to keep coming back. So we found just the discussion around what is STEM or STEAM for that matter, and where they see themselves part of it was starting to be a growing discussion with their engagement in the space. One of the things that we wanted to really think about is how the students were able to interpret some of the work that they were engaging in. How were they viewing the skills being transferable? So that was really the most important part for us, was that did they see this Zoom box window that they were engaging in? Was any of this useful skills for them to engage in any of the future job possibilities and career pathways for them? So to kind of close things out, because I'm up on time here, I just wanted to share some of the successes. And for us, I measure success not only by publications, but also the lives that we change and the people that we directly impact. So in our pilot studies, we were batting 1,000, getting kids into schools, scholarships. And for many of these students, they had no engagement as far as the STEM discussion, but within our program, particularly in the pilot, we were helping them with their FAFSA. We were sharing discussions around filling out any and all applications, so that hands-on activity within the space led to the pilot being absolutely successful. And many of those students are at these universities and working, and hopefully to be working with us in person. The virtual cohort really provided an opportunity to us to figure out how the pivot was directly impactful. I will not tell you that it was 100% successful, because some of our attendance dwindled, but for what we have here as far as success rate, myself, Jillian Riley are absolutely proud of these students and their outcomes. And as you can see, they vary in the different trade and school opportunities, but what became very consistent for us is that participation in our program, even in a virtual setting, help shift the discussion within the community. And we feel moving forward that there's this opportunity to kind of continue to ground that discussion. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share the wonderful program. I really appreciate Jillian Riley. I have to champion her name multiple times. Jillian Riley, I just said it again. Without her and her like just guidance and strength to keep us moving. If you know an academic, you know we're not really good at keeping things organized. So this whole thing would have been lit on fire. So thank you very much, Jillian, for the third time I said your name. You guys have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kareem. That was an awesome presentation. And our next presenters are Dr. Ayana Allen-Handy, and then Dr. Valerie Ifill and Dr. Michelle Rogers, Black Girls Steaming Through Dance. So they're going to present their project.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Kareem, for setting us off today and sharing your amazing, incredible work with the West Philly kids. So our project is Black Girls Steaming Through Dance. And we have been together quite a family for the last 4 years. We were kind of got our seed funding from Excite Center, and that kind of took off, you know, really implementing our vision. And so our amazing team is myself, Raja Schaar, who is the Director of Product Design in Westfall, Valerie Ifill, who's here today. Val is in the dance department, Michelle Rogers, who's in CCI, Mo Woodard, School of Ed PhD student, is our PhD graduate assistant. And then we have two undergraduate assistants, Kalila Dozier, who is in product design from Westfall, and Alicia Lipsy, who's in dance with Val. And then we have Destiny Bug, who is an alumni of Drexel and who was one of our first undergraduate assistants. She is now our program director. And so here we have a picture of our website if you are interested in learning more. So we really wanted to ground our discussion with the why. Why is it important that we do this work? And so as we see here, 3% of Black women and girls across the STEM continuum are in jobs that are STEM-based, STEM-related. And so in order to respond to this grave disparity, we came together to think about how can we change this and how can we do it urgently? And so Black Girls Steaming Through Dance engages Black girls in science, technology, engineering, arts, and math-related activities. We combine coding, design, and dance to motivate Black girls in the West Philadelphia community to explore STEAM skills, connect with their bodies, build positive self-concept and identities. So through the pillars of our program, dance, design, and coding, girls experience STEAM in a culturally sustaining environment that encourages them to cultivate their STEAM identities.
And one of the things, so this is Black Girls Steaming Through Dance. So we wanted to share why and how dance is important. And basically we steam through dance because it encourages creative expression and self-love in bodies that have been marginalized and classified as minorities. So this is a sort of a way of reclaiming the body. And how we do this is through introducing knowledge that's an embodied practice and also using movement as a way to reflect on other curriculum that we offer. We also engage in the dance making process. So they're using creative choice making practices to inform dances that they're creating. So whatever's happening in their minds, they get to see it on human bodies in space. And then we also co-create dances to present our research. So the research that happens throughout our curriculum, we like to put it on stage or now on video. So there's this performative element as well. And there's something nice about the structure of dance in that there are these elements of dance. For any dance that you create, there's an element of time, space, energy, and the human body. And we found that this is a really nice connector between the three disciplines that we work with. And how and why we're choosing design as well. So we're trying to answer the question, how might we celebrate, sense, and show how our bodies interact with space and over time? Right? So we're looking at and thinking about this in a lot of different ways. And we primarily use e-textile based wearables. So what this element of design does, it can really augment the dance by adding this extra element, but then we can also apply the coding skills to our bodies by allowing them to use these design thinking skills to design and create wearable items that they can then, show off what they have learned through this performance.
You're on mute, Michelle.
Sorry about that. When we think about why and how the girls code, we want them to think about STEAM through computational thinking, which is something they do every day. They just are not enveloped into that language of computational thinking, but it allows them to begin to step out of this academic world into bring their everyday life into what it is they do in the classroom. And we know that with this coding content, the students will have the opportunity to create not only in creative terms, but also in technical terms, so that they can use these concepts over all of these criteria. And we want to make sure that they understand that neither one of these neither one of these concepts is superior than the other, so that, as Val said, the embodiment of the dance has components that help them in their design and what they design. And that informs how they code what they code. And so that the dance also brings together all of those things as well. Next slide.
And so one of the things we're sharing here is pretty much the conceptual framework of Black Girls Steaming Through Dance. And so after our second year, we conducted a study with our dance educators. So they are undergraduate dance majors and minors from Westfall who actually taught the dance curriculum. And we were really interested in how they develop kind of culturally sustaining pedagogies and also use kind of critical pedagogies to kind of decolonize dance. And so our findings from this research is really has shown us that navigating race, place, and space is critical to their culturally sustaining pedagogies and critical dance pedagogy development. Critical reflection and self-efficacy was also salient to this, as well as the mentorship and practice that we offer in Black Girls Steaming Through Dance. So what's really interesting about our model is that the majority of us are Black women. But we have dance teachers who have been white women. And so being able to have a space where, in a sense, they were minorities in this space, it was really awesome to see the development of their critical pedagogies.
And we always like this slide because we are working across disciplines, right? We have dance, we have design, we have coding, and it's all integrated into one session. And so there are sort of these three pillars, the pink one, the mustard one, and the blue one. So this really, and we actually use this color coding throughout. So our students always know which one we're addressing, and we use that on our website as well. But it also helps them to find these connections. So these four elements that dance uses, time, space, energy, and the body, you can clearly see in the design, energy and body is something that we're really focusing on. And then, of course, this really critical element of e-textiles. And then with coding, it's really about the time and the space. So talking about, loops, so sequences and loops in code ties back to sequences and repetition competition in dance and the critical AR and coding component there. Also below the pink dancers, if you go to those images, you can see our students in a dress rehearsal, and then you can see a smaller image of them workshopping the idea of space, the element of space, and designing the space for the choreography. And then if you look at the mustard pillar, this is an example of our kits that we send out. So we would have these materials in person, but now we're just driving them to people's houses. And it includes our conductive tape and our also conductive thread if we're using it, any circuit boards or lights, and then of course the objects that they're designing. And then the third one, this is one, the camera picked up much more, but this was actually something that was filmed in the dark, and the students created a music video, and they designed these black shirts that light up and respond to the choreography and the music using the chibi chips. So I think that Michelle is going to take a moment and talk us through some more images, since process has been so important. And I think that these photos will really capture the essence of our working space in multiple areas.
So in this collection of photographs, we kind of highlight some of the design that was done, where we allowed the girls, or encouraged the girls to explore what it is that they wanted to represent and how they could augment what it is that they wanted, that they could represent. And that it wasn't strictly something that those that were interested in dance would take more of an initiative of, or those that were interested in design would only do. But one of the strong points of our project is that the girls are allowed, or they float to whatever it is that they are really excited about and what they can engage in. And the hope is that as we look at their STEAM identity formation, that we're not only trying to develop coders or computer science majors, that we're not only trying to develop industrial designers, or not only develop dancers, but that we're looking at women who can operate across this spectrum, and that they can then choose their career field or choose their adventure however they would like to do it. Next slide. Here we have more documentation of the actual chip that we expose them to, so they're allowed to, they can see the results of their coding. We have also here an introduction over the last year of some virtual reality functionality. So the picture in the top right of your screen allowed the students to do some coding and programming that they could then see movement and see reality functioning right in front of them on this cube. And also in the top left, you'll see that these are some young men that are participating, some boys that participated in our program. So we didn't turn anyone away, even though it was Black girls steaming and dance. We also noticed that lots of people are interested in dance, lots of people are interested in design, lots of people are interested in coding. And that the purpose of our program is to expand participation, but we also know that we don't want to turn anyone away. Next slide. And then the final slide kind of demonstrates the excitement that the girls experienced when they actually were able to see their designs come to fruition, and how we were able to demonstrate them. We were able to capture that excitement that they had when they were able to see something that they created come to life. And that's not often available for them in their regular classroom. So this was allowing them to see that supported, and to see women that look like them help them get there. So next, I think Ayana's going to play a video of one of our young ladies' recent creation.
Val, did you want to kind of set the context? And this is our last,
sure.
kind of our finale of the presentation.
Grand finale. We're going to end with a bang here. And so this is one of our current students. So, and we're in the process of capturing, this culminating experience. And so what they did is the students created a dance language. So using the Zoom screens, they knew they could use their arms and their heads. And so they actually created language that one of our students, who's a designer, she designed out like a PDF of what this language would look like in symbols. And then so they used it to go ahead and choreograph a dance. Then they worked with our PhD graduate assistant to create a virtual space that is interactive. So when they move their bodies, the different characters or the sprites move as well on the screen, which they've coded to respond to either tempo or direction change. And then the final element was design. So they also got to choose and design something. So this is actually inspired by Afrofuturism. So she has a big necklace on and a headband that she's in the process of getting to illuminate. And this is from a dress rehearsal where she's putting all the pieces together.
And so in closing, we have two recent publications that talk a little bit more about the program and our research specifically. We have a chapter in the book Challenges and Opportunities for Transforming from STEM to STEAM Education, as well as an article that came out last month in the Journal of Urban Learning, Teaching and Research. Thank you. Sorry if we went over, Vera.
Right.
Thank you all so much. That was just an amazing presentation. Just loved just seeing all of the kids. It's just an amazing project. So thank you so much, everybody. So last but not least is the Drexel Literacy Camp. We're just going to talk about the virtual program that we ran last summer. So Whitney and Katie will be joining me with the presentation. Whitney, do you have the slide deck?
Yeah, just give me 1 second.
Okay.
I'm gonna. So I'm going to apologize in advance. My children are here and they are chatty. So, okay. So thank you to the other two presentations. It was fascinating to learn about the research that you have all done. And it's just remarkable. And I can't wait to learn more and read more about it. Okay, so our talk today is going to focus on the Drexel Literacy Camp. So this is a part of a capstone project that graduate students in the Reading Specialist program are required to design and implement a literacy camp. The summer camp occurred from July 20th to August 20th of 2020. It was Monday through Thursday, and the graduate students split the camp into a morning and afternoon session over 2-hour spans to make the camp more accessible for the families. In total, there were 8 graduate students who facilitated the camp under the guidance of their instructor and were assisted by 3 undergraduate and 5 high school students. 20 students in total participated in the camp, including 11 girls and 9 boys. So I wanted to add an additional caveat. So the graduate students have a lot of autonomy to create this space. So the role of their instructor is simply just to provide minimal guidance, but all the decisions regarding the materials, the content, and the instructional decisions were done by the graduate students. In accordance with the legal guidelines of Drexel University, the following platforms were permitted for the camp: Zoom and Class Dojo. Zoom, as we know, is a secure virtual meeting platform, and Class Dojo enables students, teachers, and parents to send messages, videos, pictures, and documents to one another. The graduate students use Google Slides in order to set the tone for daily instruction for the students. More specifically, the slides were arranged to include a warm-up activity that corresponded with the morning meeting, a discussion of the theme, a whole group read aloud, embedded breaks, links to activities and games, and a closing meeting. But primarily the Zoom was like their classroom. Sorry, I'm trying to. Okay. As a team, the graduate students decided what materials to purchase for the children who attended the camp. The children all received a marbled notebook, a whiteboard with markers, and an eraser, pencils, and colored pencils, a folder, a pencil pouch, sticky notes, erasers, and a pencil sharpener. They were also given 5 books. They also distributed, 5 books to each student who attended the camp, and all the materials were included in a Drexel University drawstring bag. The graduate students were also remarkably successful at integrating community building activities throughout the course to create a safe and positive learning environment for the children. The graduate students displayed care towards their students in building the online learning community, which is an integral element of both culturally relevant, culturally responsive, and trauma-informed teaching. Developing teachers who embrace culturally relevant teaching beliefs and practices is particularly important for educators who teach in multiracial, multilingual, and multicultural urban communities. In addition, the high school interns and undergraduate students would give daily shout outs to the students in the camp between breaks and at the close of camp each day. And they started to look forward to this part of it. It was such a very positive interaction within the group that they created. Finally, the graduate students were intentional in including the parents throughout the camp. They took turns writing the weekly newsletter called the Bookworm Bulletin. In each newsletter, the graduate students highlighted what country they were planning to talk about that week, an Instagram challenge for the Drexel School of Ed Instagram account, pictures from last week's theme day, the theme for the forthcoming week, and links to the Zoom sessions. So what they decided to do, I haven't gotten to that slide yet, but I do want to provide that background, is they selected around the world. So each week they went to, they chose a country from a different part of the world and highlighted that throughout the week. One parent stated, "The teachers were very patient, fun, attentive, and supportive of the children. My daughter was nervous to attend the camp, but after her first day, she was hooked. I'm excited that this program has sparked a passion in her with writing again, and now she understands even more why reading is so important. What an amazing program and team. A huge shout out of gratefulness to you all." The graduate students use literacy approaches informed by developmentally appropriate practices and culturally relevant teaching to support the children's reading and writing growth during the summer camp. The graduate students did not have prior knowledge about the children's cultural backgrounds prior to camp, but they decided early on to select multicultural literature that reflected different languages and cultures around the world, including the US. The graduate students connected the text to reading and writing activities to promote children's growth around reading, fluency, decoding, vocabulary, and writing tasks. One of the graduate students reflected on their experience by stating, "We selected texts that had better themes, promoted representation and diversity, connected to the camp's theme of around the world, as well as connected to the other texts that we read. We used our read alouds as our central focus and means to practice fluency, comprehension, writing, and vocabulary. We could provide students background knowledge through videos, pictures, and conduct research about the author prior to reading these books."
Thanks so much, Whitney, for the overview of the program. So this is just to spotlight just some of the instructional strategies that were done within the virtual space. And again, keep in mind, this camp actually is in its 5th year. And so the previous 4 years, it was always a face-to-face camp, and we had it at the Dornsife Center. So this was a dramatic shift in having to do this all online. But the graduate students were able to definitely do it successfully. So as Whitney talked about, they chose the theme of around the world. And what they did is they did a whole class read aloud at the beginning. And as Whitney mentioned, they introduced the country. In this case, the example would be Russia. And so the upper right-hand corner is an example of a video or images where they would ask the students, engage their prior knowledge, to ask them, what do you know about the country of Russia? And then to introduce the country to them. And then there's a book that's written by a Russian author. So this is a traditional fairy tale called Masha and the Bear. It were originally written in Russian, and they would introduce this book to the kids, ask questions about it, and then make connections in breakout groups where they had a Wilson Multisensory Phonics Center, they had a reading center and a writing center. So the bottom 2 squares would be an example of what they would do in a reading center, where one of the graduate students introduced specific words taken from the text, and then to do some specific word study around breaking the word apart into base words and suffix, which is, I think, it's an effective strategy to help kids with decoding.
So in order to explore the pivot that took place, which I really love that term that you used, Dr. Edouard. So the pivot was when the camp moved suddenly from face-to-face to online during COVID-19. We conducted a research study, and our hope is that we might be able to take some specific lessons forward to share and inform practice going forward. So we used a qualitative study to capture the experiences of the graduate students in their capstone practicum and their attempt to design and deliver a literacy program during COVID-19. We also hope to capture the experiences of the course instructor and the experiences of the students enrolled in the camp. And I just want to add here that I came onto this project in the fall as part of my research assistantship. So that was at the data analysis stage. So I'm very grateful to Dr. Lee and Dr. Impellizzeri for including me on this project. The following research questions were explored. What were the experiences of graduate students in the program in designing and implementing a virtual summer literacy camp for urban elementary students during COVID-19? What were the experiences of the instructor of the course in terms of supervising and teaching the graduate students during COVID-19? And how did the online summer literacy camp support urban children in their reading and writing development? So each of our research questions is related to each of the 3 major stakeholders in the camp, which were the graduate students, the instructor, and the students involved in the camp. So our participants were 5 of the 8 graduate students who consented to the research. These are all practicing educators who were pursuing the literacy certification through Drexel. The course instructor, who is an adjunct faculty member at Drexel, and her normal job is she's a practicing reading specialist within a district, and she's also notably a former graduate of the Drexel Reading Specialist Program. And then finally, the other participants were the 20 students ages 6 to 9 who live or attend school in the Promise Zone. The sources of data that we collected were focus group interviews conducted with the graduate students, a semi-structured interview with the instructor, and then 2 of the researchers attended various camp sessions and took field notes and also screenshots of the activities that were occurring during those sessions. For the data analysis, data were uploaded to NVivo. An inductive coding approach was taken to derive concepts, themes, and models. 4 major themes were derived from coding. The first theme related to graduate students' resilience, where they showed remarkable resilience and adaptiveness in transitioning to the online environment. Most of the graduate students conveyed openness towards the new format, despite conveying that they had had some negative experiences transitioning in their own districts in the spring. And within this tone of resilience, you can see here on the screen that the graduate students used or found creative ways to use technology. So here we have a graduate student using Adobe Whiteboard to provide annotated feedback on students' written work. The second theme related to graduate students' efforts to build community. And this was one of the major sources of apprehension that the students reflected upon, that they would not be able to create community or connect with their students in the online environment. And they were quite surprised that they were able to build community effectively. And Whitney spoke earlier about some of the approaches that they used in order to do this, such as using morning greetings, where they would ask students questions to get them engaged. And then another unanticipated benefit afforded by the online environment was the use of the chat feature on Zoom, where campers and teachers were able to interact in this sort of extra dimension without disrupting the main instruction. And this helped to sustain engagement and build interaction. The third theme related to the instructor, and it was clear that she viewed her role from a supportive lens rather than one of being more of a direct instruction. And when the camp moved to the virtual environment, she tried to make herself more present for the graduate students, hosting Zoom meetings to facilitate brainstorming. But in those sessions, she was very careful not to explicitly tell the students how to teach the camp. She let them sort of struggle and figure out how to design and deliver the camp for themselves. And then finally, she also attended camp regularly, and she would offer positive encouragement and targeted feedback to help facilitate their thinking and planning. Finally, the final theme related to children's engagement and motivation. So we did not collect data on student outcomes. And in fact, one of the limitations acknowledged in this study is that conducting assessments in the online environment posed a very serious challenge for graduate students. But we did get a sense of the students' experience through the field notes, screenshots, and the anecdotes that the graduate students recounted. And as Vera and Whitney noted, an element of the program design that emerged as really important to the graduate students was selecting texts from diverse cultural backgrounds. And this approach ran through other elements of the program, like the vocabulary instruction. So as you saw, we saw the example of cheerful related to Masha and the bear. And this pedagogical approach seemed to promote better text to self, text to text, and text to world connections. Also, it seemed to really engage and motivate the campers, and we saw fairly high engagement over the 5 weeks of camp, despite it being delivered in an online format.
So finally, just wanted to talk about just really high level discussion and implication points. You know, again, this is, I would say the camp started in July. So this is only 3 months after the pandemic hit and all Philadelphia schools were closed. All schools, well, most schools, all schools in Pennsylvania were online. So this transition had not settled in at this point when this camp happened. Everything was new, hadn't been done before. So I think it was very stressful for the students to have to think about developing a capstone project in this particular context. But I think they had actually handled that pressure and stress really well. They worked together and planned together. They were coordinated, collaborative, and showed incredible resilience. I think there was certainly an effort on the part of the graduate students without having a lot of pre-camp information about any of the students. We wanted to just have students register. There wasn't a criteria for registration. Any of the kids, as long as they lived in the promised neighborhood or attended one of the schools, could be part of the camp. But they thought it was really important to think about the theme of traveling around the world. And so thinking about what high quality multicultural texts look like and being able to bring in authentic representations of different cultural literature and to introduce that to the kids and to make the connections with their own lives. That was something that was supported throughout the camp. as well as just specific literacy activities that we had taken some very detailed observation notes to be able to capture the conversations that happened in each of the breakout centers. There were, of course, obvious obstacles. There were lots of internet connection issues, challenges with conducting any literacy pre and post assessments. And this was actually, there's this myth that teaching online is somewhat less time consuming than planning a face-to-face camp. That wasn't true. They all talked about that it took them 2-3 times the amount of time that it would take if they were in person. So it was an incredible amount of time. I think some implications, and this is actually, we're just revising and resubmitting a book chapter for an early childhood book series, but this question about whether emergency remote teaching, and I think this camp would fall into that category, through online platforms, whether or not this particular shift can mitigate effects of any learning loss during the pandemic, I think is going to be something that requires further research. I think there are also some questions around children's access. You know, when you've got really young children and their digital literacy skills are varied, having someone at home that could be a facilitator in the online realm, I think, is something that can be an equity issue, as well as technology, you know, connectivity issues. So these are sort of important mediators for online learning that can sort of exacerbate or sort of show those equity gaps in the education system. So thank you so much for listening to our presentation.
Thank you for all the presentations. We got a lot of positive feedback, but I found it to be a really refreshing way to end the week. And now what I want to do, because I know we've been meeting for a long time, is just to launch right into the questions. So we have some questions that just want to ask you about the trajectory of like start to finish and what your reflections are, your personal reflections as a researcher or as a student or a student researcher. And so the first question is, looking back when you first started off your project, can you tell us a little bit about working with the schools and the students, and if there were any challenges to start and then sustain your project? We've heard a little bit, but I just wanted to know about your own personal reflections. And so is there anyone who would like to start off with a response? So to recap, it's when you first started the project, were there any challenges to start the project and any challenges maybe in sustaining the project?
I'll start off first. So I'll be very direct, mince no words. It was absolutely the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. Because what you do is that you create a narrative where you sell a dream to students. You tell them that we have a space that's welcoming, comforting, designed to directly speak your language into you. And it will always be here, active, ready for you to participate. And then the space then grows further and further apart. And then on top of that, where you try to convince students that, particularly in our work, was about career pathway readiness, that the world outside will be ready for you when you have achieved many of these competencies. So particularly in Philadelphia, you have high levels of unemployment, both outside and within the homes of these students. So it was very difficult initially to get that buy-in. And again, I know we've discussed the connectivity concerns and just the social aspects of what's taking place, but really to get students to want to buy into this idea that if they learn this material from a screen, it will then somehow translate to them applying it in the physical activity, and jobs will be waiting. So for us, to borrow a term from Katie, to pivot back, see, made you smile, to what we had to do was to figure out, well, how do we really think about how students are learning in this virtual setting? And particularly, are there skills that will translate when they go into a hybrid framework? So one kind of small example is that we had to change the idea of the elevator pitch, because people were terrified of being in an elevator. So the elevator pitch had to evolve into having an online platform that shares your competencies, your engagement, your portfolio, and your profile. So that had to be the new elevator pitch. The last thing that I'll share in the context of the difficulty of the pivot was really trying to find platforms that were not trapped behind paywalls. So this idea that the entire globe is open to you from a digital footprint becomes problematic, because there was a lot of e-portfolio programs at the most highest level that can give you that connectivity to a much bigger collective, which required money. So we needed to figure out how we can build all these kind of connective platforms that not only were very accessible from the mobile aspect of it, but then also was something that the employers that the students were seeking to be a part of were using those platforms as well. So it's a two-tiered position that we were placed in, where we could solve one of them by just giving you an opportunity to engage in these competencies. But it was another thing for us then to think about how we share that in the new world that we found ourselves in. I'll take my comments off the air.
I think, and I'll be brief with BGSD. I mean, we're talking about 4 years ago, so it's hard to kind of remember the onset. But with any, type of community engaged work, it is challenging, but that's the beauty of the work. And I think because we have such a dynamic team, and we are, really, really close, we are able to kind of overcome some of those barriers. So some of the challenges for us, similar to what Kareem and others have shared, was the pivot to going online. And we, having a program that relies on movement and choreography and a lot of group work is really, challenging to think about what does this, or re-envision, what does this look like in a virtual environment? And I think when you have passion and drive and an amazing team, whether it's virtual, in person, on the moon, it's going to be exciting and amazing work because of that commitment. Val, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, maybe something really quickly. I feel like there were 2 challenges, and like Ayana was saying, we sort of had, when we started, there was already an existing relationship with the dance program, so we were able to connect with folks in getting started. So that was a little bit easier. But one thing that we noticed is we have a lot of different students from different schools, so they're kind of baseline like literacies were so different. And so we had to try to figure out how to meet each group or each student where they were, which was really interesting. And then with the switch to COVID, I feel like it helped. And I don't know if you feel the same, Ayana, but I feel like it helped me realize how much there's this ecosystem, right? It's not just us and the students, but it's us, the students, their parents, their grandparents, it's this big, well-working, kind of well-oiled ecosystem. And which was really interesting. So then once the parents were removed and it was just us and the kids, and then this platform, and we're trying to show a 7-year-old, how to log on to this website, and then how to remember their login and their password, there's small things, but that just, I think, to echo what Vera was saying, things that would just take just a second to now take 45 minutes. And so just navigating that has been a challenge.
So I think just piggybacking on what everyone else had said, I think the literacy camp, because we had a recollection of what the previous 4 years were like, and that it was great to bring in guest readers every Thursday, and we had the what is it, the dogs, the 2 dogs at Drexel who are therapy dogs. We had the kids read to them. I think one was named Java and the other one was named Espresso. And there were certain things that we could not do. We had game time in between where the undergrads would take them outside of the Dorsive Center, and they would throw a football around. I mean, there were certain things that we could not replicate in a virtual space, and that was really hard. So I think our graduate students and our undergrads put their energy together to try to come up with fun things, like, play a tune and they try to guess what it is. And they would always have the kids for breaks, choose a song. And I learned that a lot of the kids like K-pop. I was really excited about that. They were listening to Korean pop, but yeah, I think the community building was what we did not expect. We thought they were going to lose interest, but I think that was probably the best part, was that they really felt like they were part of a community, and that was really clear in just the kids who were there and the parent survey. So
Thank you so much. My next question is really about how did it catalyze new research or make you look at something in a new way and spark something that you didn't expect you were even going to work on?
So I'll take that one really quick. In our first year, when we first started off with the coding and the designing of virtual environments, we would have the girls kind of create their own avatars or, their own personal representation. And what we found was that there was sometimes an incongruence between how the girls saw themselves and what they wanted represented on the screen. So it made us really think about, how do we really pull in these discussions of identity and race in terms of the positive identity development. So we had some, Black girls who were like, I don't want my hair to look like what my hair really is, and so we had to really think about, if we're going to be talking about developing positive identity through this work, what does that mean for unpacking larger socio-political context around Black womanhood? And so I would say that that's something, a research direction that we didn't necessarily go in anticipating, but have now really focused on that in terms of the piece of the identity development for our girls.
I think related to that, what's really fascinating is that you each have different constellations of collaborations, just sort of like on the Drexel side. So it's just the teams you formed in Drexel, and then there is the community that you engage with, the multiple layers in the ecosystem as suggested. So what did you learn from each other in this process? And does anyone else want to comment on any ways this might have catalyzed new research ideas for you?
So for me, the new research discussion, there needs to be more nuance beyond just discussing the digital divide. There needs to be the nuance of the digital divide also connected to how it's important to reflect digital citizenship to our students. So why I specifically talk about digital citizenship, because our students were not just representative of themselves, but they were also representative of their West Philadelphia and their high school community. So you felt that those kind of skills that they were not only negotiating and navigating within their home, but now the virtual space in their school, they were presenting that to employers in the virtual setting. And there were just ways they were sharing their stories, they were engaging, that became very important. So I'll give you an example. For our students to be able to put together a portfolio, it was more than just creating a LinkedIn profile. It was about also looking at how they share their content and their information across all their social platforms that you can easily type in and look them up. Badging was very negligible. There's a lot of investment in badging, but for our students, they needed to engage in skills that reflected the badges that the employee that they particularly wanted to engage it cared about. So it's more than just having this general engagement in for the work that we do in STEM competencies, but what was a very targeted way to present that. And that's what we learned. We couldn't just make 5 or 6 badges that were just very general. It needed to be very targeted. So this kind of personal engagement for our students is also a nuance in the digital divide that we're not talking about. It's not about just logging in and giving you access. It's about making you very much a targeted potential hire in this particular company or career pathway that is going to create this real fruitful engagement. That's what we were thinking about in our new research endeavor, is how do we create those kind of nuanced discussions and targeted interactions between our students and their potential employers.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to share something. I mean, I think it's a little bit different maybe than what you were talking about, but in sharing what I've learned in, I love what you said, like collaborative constellations. Like, so within our group, there are so many different skill sets, and it's just really inspirational. And I feel like I've just come in just hungry to learn alongside of the, with the 7-year-olds or the 10-year-olds. And so I think that that's something really nice about our space. I feel like it's an interdisciplinary learning space where, as the people who hold the power in the space, as the teachers, we are able to sit down next to somebody who's much younger and say, can you teach me this? Because if you see these girls navigating the code and everything else, it's just really inspirational. And so I think that there's like a really nice exchange. And I think that they respect the fact that, okay, they're working on an assignment and, oh, let me build one too, and that's actually been fruitful in a lot of ways. So personally, in the area of dance, I don't think it's as transdisciplinary as it could be, as it should be. There's a real gap in that. And so it's allowing me to learn and deepen my practice to make larger contributions to the field. And I really do think that students like our girls who are just immersed in, I don't have to be a monolith. There are so many ways that I can show up, and there's a real opportunity for them to step into these spaces as leaders just because of all of these areas that are now connected to their identities.
I think it's really interesting because in school, what they focus on is they tell kids, okay, pick something you want to be. Pick one thing that you want to be. Do you want to be a cop? Do you want to be a doctor? And it's just so narrow, and it doesn't look at so many aspects of their learning or dimensions of their identity that they have choices and multiple choices. So all of your projects, I think, really showcased and highlighted that. When you're talking about the interdisciplinary learning that takes place, and Kareem was talking about that as well, and then also through reading, learning about cultures through reading, there are so many different ways that students can really, I think, maybe broaden their confidence perhaps, and not just think of like, oh, well, I want to grow up and be this like one thing and have such a narrow scope presented to them of trying to fit into one thing. That's one of the takeaways I'm getting. So
I think there are two things that I think about related to the literacy camp. One is because it's attached to a course, how do we take all of the wonderful and fabulous ideas from each of these programs to inform the way that we develop pre-service teachers? So what I mean is that, we, all of us are so worried about what is Pennsylvania Department of Education competencies, professional competencies, and there's, I think, this gap of just creativity, innovation, other ways to think about STEAM education and implications that are cross-disciplinary, that gets lost. And so I think about, how would projects like these how should it inform the way that we instruct teachers who want to become teachers and in-service teachers? Secondly, I think about where informal learning spaces in some ways fill a need for students that are not addressed in formal academic educational spaces and classrooms. There are things that are presented that are embedded in each of these programs that I don't think are philosophically embedded in regular K-12 formal classroom settings. So where do we take the informal space to make it more influential in how we are teaching kids in the K-12 space? So it's just something that I think about as I listen and learn from all of these wonderful projects.
absolutely. Did anyone not get a chance to make any remarks about final comments about their project? I think Whitney, did you have anything you were going to add? I'm just looking at the presenters still here.
I had to unmute myself. Just that in terms of like next steps, like what we're looking ahead as far as our research, what we, myself, Vera, and Katie are looking at, we're unpacking a bit more on the culturally relevant teaching aspects of the reading specialists, and particularly we're looking at 3 specific reading specialists to do a really deep case study dive into how what we observed them doing in the camp, how that is triangulated with what they shared on their final Padlet, or what they shared in discussion groups, or what they shared in their projects throughout the course. So we're trying to kind of to see if they really are sort of practicing these different skills in all aspects.
Any last comments or questions from the wider audience? I'll just open it up. I appreciate all the conversation going on in the chat, but I just want to give one last opportunity for final comments or kudos.
I just want to say that you're all awesome, and it's been so great to work with all of you in the Promise neighborhood. And I know our schools and our students really appreciate all of your work. So just want to say thank you from me.
I was very, very late because I had another meeting. But I've been very interested in knowing more about the work that's going on in the schools in the West Philadelphia community. And I'm super excited with what I'm hearing, what I have heard. I'm at a distance, so I'm not physically there in Philadelphia. But as I said, I've watched from a distance and wanted to know more. So thank you so much for the work you're doing and for sharing that. And this is being recorded, right? So other people who had conflicts can watch it. Yep. Fantastic.
And then one last reminder to our faculty and our students, we like to showcase publications that result from grant work especially. And I noticed Ayana had referenced 2 articles, and then Vera had referenced a chapter. And so we would like to showcase that under the faculty publication site, just so we can make connections for people, connections between the projects and the actual outcomes. And so I encourage you to do so. And thank you to everyone who's able to join us today. It was a real pleasure to hear all of these projects presented together. And it's amazing work. And hopefully we'll make this an annual activity and be able to have a little more lead time to open it up to the Drexel community so we can share it a little bit more broadly and encourage a little bit more attendance. I know we didn't have a lot of lead time because of different issues with the pandemic and the complications. So thanks for your patience and your willingness to join us, and have a great, wonderful rest of your day and excellent weekend. The sun is shining.
Hey,
So
thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
You too.